The United States is often called the land of the free and place of opportunity. However, some people face more challenges than others in their pursuit of happiness. What role do things like race, gender, and economic status play in all of this? We've got a few millennials to weigh in on this topic. This is what I wish you knew about getting a fair shot. Hello everyone, my name is Yasmin Arrington, and welcome to I Wish You Knew. According to an opinion article posted on NBCnews.com, some minorities feel the need to justify their existence. Unlike the majority, they face issues with immigration, gun laws, police reform, and even pay equity that does not provide equal treatment under the law. What message does this send to minority communities? Here to tell you what they wish you knew are
Jonathan Hill.
Hi, I'm Janet.
Vincent Van.
And Brittany Timmons.
Okay, panel. The article written by Stephen Nuno says, quote, "The reality minorities face when we confront issues like immigration, police reform, and gun control is that our lives depend on our ability to convince the majority that we have earned the privilege of sharing space with them." That's pretty powerful stuff. Mm-hmm. What do you all think? Have you ever felt the need to defend yourself and your right to be in a given space, whether it's your job or school, or even in your own communities?
Every day.
Yes.
Every day.
Yeah.
That sounds like an easy way to ask, have you ever asserted your blackness? Every day.
Like, as a child of immigrants, a person of color, a woman, and someone who comes from a low socioeconomic background, I have to justify everything I do every single day to not just my peers, my colleagues, but even to my parents, my own community members. And it's like a tremendous struggle trying to just be like, I am here and I just want to do well and I want to help, but why is it what you're looking at and what you're seeing like becoming a barrier to you being able to connect with me?
What are some examples maybe of?
I think like what you just said, like just the first approach. People look at you and their thoughts begin to roam. And certain situations like I've had, like being in a store, in certain instances you can kind of feel it. Like you can feel the eyes, people watching you, you can feel people trying to see, are you window shopping today? Are you really gonna be able to buy something? You might not think I can afford anything in your store. Certain instances like walking into a job, in certain, they think you aren't going to be able to do it. One, I'm a woman of color, and you already have to put on your best face. I find that I don't want you to think whatever it is, your thoughts, I don't want to prove you right. So yeah, you turn on your voice, you dismiss some of your slang, you get yourself
code
together.
Switch, right?
You got a code switch. That's exactly what it is. You have to be able to present yourself in these situations where people are already looking at you and doubting you based off just your first approach.
And I would also say, you all may have been in the same situation when we were young. And grandmother always telling me you have to be 10 times better just to hit surface level. And so when you're a child, someone telling you have to be 10 times better than the next kid because of your color of your skin, that conditions you to tell you that you might be less than. So, those things, always trying to build myself up to these false notions.
Yeah, my mom always said, like, when people look at you, they're not going to see an American, they're going to see a Korean or an Asian. Like, they're not going to treat you the same way. And it's so true. Like, I walk around and unless I open my mouth, people think I'm a foreigner. And then if I do open my mouth, it's like, oh my God, your English is so good. I'm like, yes, because I was born here and I was educated here. And so it's kind of just like, how can you make such a quick assumption like that?
I think it's always interesting being a person of color and you're put in certain situations or certain environments and you're looked at just as a body. No more than that, no soul, you have no hobbies outside of that, you're just a body in that space. And then you're expected to perform a certain way. And I think that's something that a lot of us as the young persons of color, young millennials of color, like we sort of kind of woke up to last summer. I mean, like that was when all the killings were happening. You had Philando Castile, you had Alton Sterling, and then as soon as it all happened, it got to the millennials quick because we're all on social media. But then secondly, it was like, okay, well, how will you react? And then when you react, how are you going to expect other people to react around you? And I think that's where we sort of kind of are now as millennials because, yeah, we get it. I think we all get it. And if you say you don't get it, then you don't have a cell phone, which is impossible now. But then now to say that, okay, you got it, what are you going to do with that information? Like, how are you going to represent your entire community? And if you can't represent your entire community, how are you going to represent yourself to sort of kind of put your best foot forward for your community? Because a lot of people will never get to know your community's full story, but they will definitely look at you and accuse you of being everyone else.
But that's such a burden, right? Like, why do I have to be the person to educate everyone about my community?
It's very true because I had the pleasure of going to like Thailand in March, and you could just tell. Like, I mean, you saw a few people of color and certain things like that, but their response to us was kind of just. It was really like. Oh my gosh. And you know, we see each other every day. Of course, we look at each other with hatred or what she got on, or look at her hair today, look at him. We judge each other based off negative things. But their demeanor was so like they've never seen a person this color in their presence. So the most that they see is things like that's on TV. You're loving hip hops, whatever Nicki Minaj is doing, whatever Black China. These are the images that they get of us, and we have to run with it to an. You either have to prove it wrong or you just have to carry it on your back. Like, we all are the same type of people. We all do the same thing.
You said prove it wrong. And like, it made me think about even just last time I was in Silicon Valley, and we just talked about it before we came up. And it's just like Silicon Valley, you know, that's the new Wall Street, the tech space. How many people of color out there? When we start having that conversation, there aren't many of us. But then when you start having the conversation, okay, well, what about the people of color that are there? How are those conversations going? My first day on that job, the white co-founder of the company asked me, okay, do you like rap music? As soon as I walked in, all right.
On the
First day, first question he ever asked me. The second thing that I noticed was that literally when all the killings were happening, the office didn't react. Like, it was literally an everyday thing. Like, everyone was still moving, engine didn't stop at all. And we had to send out a newsletter to the entire team. Like, do you all realize what's going on? You have Black people that work for your company. How are you going to react? How are you going to support them? How are you going to be empathetic? And that's the thing. People aren't empathetic. Like, they're apathetic. They see it. They see the problem. They just choose not to be a part of it. And that's the problem. Like, when you choose how you want to react, like if you want to be a part of it, because then some people just have sympathy and be like, oh, they'll be fine. Like, they're hurting, but they'll be fine.
I think hold that thought. We have to take a break. But first, it's trivia time. Which U.S. document includes the phrase life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Stay tuned for the answer. Welcome back to I Wish You Knew. Let's talk more specifically about the impact of gender, ethnicity, and sexual orientation, and how these factors have an effect on laws and policies and how we move through life and you know, live in our own space, in our own community.
I would say, as it pertains to race, and one of the things that, for me, that I love working on is criminal justice reform. And you have to have people in place to change the power structure. So you have to have people that are lobbying, because each morning there are lobbyists that are going against what we're fighting for. So you look at the CCA, the Corrections Corporation of America. They have stock on Wall Street, right, in which people are buying stock in hopes that brown and Black people are going to jail. You have the owner of Corvick Civic, that is a corporation in which they are paying for more and more private prisons. So what we need in place is more, less marches and more people that's lobbying and changing these laws. Because each morning that we wake up, there's just as many individuals that are fighting to keep the structure in place.
Wow.
I'm a through and through grassroots, like on the ground activist, and I've been for many, many years now. And I love the marches, I love the protests, I love all of that, but I totally agree with him. It needs to really transition into being connecting of policymakers and decision makers, right? Those folks in Congress, whether it be the Senate or the House. And an issue that's really important to me is immigration reform. And there's so many communities that are being disenfranchised because of basically the barrier that's created to not have a pathway to citizenship. It's just not existent. Like if everyone who wanted to obtain a U.S. citizenship the proper way, it would take anywhere from 25 to 30 years for them to actually obtain their citizenship if they did it the quote-unquote right way. So, it's kind of understandable in a sense why people kind of come here the way they do, because it's almost hopeless to them to become a U.S. citizen and try to achieve a better life for themselves. And thankfully, President Obama did put in place a program like DACA, which is the Deferred Action for Early Arrivals, and it's for basically kids of undocumented immigrants who came here at a very young age. Like, for example, like a 5-year-old was brought here by their parents, and they basically lived their whole lives here. But then they find out their senior year of high school, when they're trying to apply for college, they ask for a social security number and they don't have one. And it happens so frequently that the kids find out right at that moment that they're an undocumented youth. And so this program allowed folks to apply. If you came here at a certain time, if you're a certain age, you can get a driver's license, you can get a worker's permit, and you can, maybe get a little closer to that pathway of citizenship, but it's actually still not a pathway to citizenship.
There's not.
There isn't. And so,
and this is different for people who have what they call
yeah, it's
green
totally different.
cards
So undocumented folks are completely what they would call illegal, illegal immigrants. And so, these are folks who basically have, at this point, zero option. People can swing it any way they want, but there's absolutely no option
and
for
they
them.
can't apply for a prerequisite before.
I mean, they could have, but
they
again,
had to do it in their in their
and
country.
then that is included in that 25 to 30 year journey. And I think a lot of the times, for example, where it affects is like, say you were to go to a school that offers in-state tuition, these folks would not be eligible for that because they're considered an international student because they're not a U.S. citizen. And so they're paying, getting to college is also then a tremendous barrier for them as well. So DACA is kind of helped in that way, where some states become sanctuary cities or sanctuary states, and they allow like in-state tuition for folks who have DACA and things like that. But again, this is just a temporary kind of, ability for them, but it's not a solution.
Right. What about, so we've just briefly touched the surface about, race and, immigration laws, and folks who have come from other countries have migrated to the United States. What about gender, age maybe, or even sexual orientation?
I think with age, I've experienced that a lot, especially like coming fresh out of school and then you're in the educational realms. You get sized up, definitely, because people think, a teacher that's been here for about 20 plus years, they're pushing 50, and you're coming in here and you're this fresh face, you look young, you carry yourself with this vibrancy. To them, I don't know how to do my job. And you have to do things that, again, that they are not going to expect me to do. I know what I'm talking about. I can control kids. They're going to listen to me. I'm going to be able to be an effective person within the classroom. And also just small things when it comes to gender. I'm a female. I'm going to carry myself to look nice. I want to look nice. I want to be presentable. Right. So then you have these principals and these teachers that, are you listening to me or are you looking at me? What is, it's hard to find a balance within that. If somebody taking you serious, or what are your thoughts as I'm sitting here telling you my concern within the classroom, but I think it's going through one ear and out the other. I think it's just all about us as Americans finding a certain level of respect for one another, but that's been missing for like several years now.
I think it's always interesting to think that, like, as we're talking about these laws of like immigration and gender and like your sexual orientation, these are only civil liberties that we're talking about. Like, we aren't talking about anything that kills someone. We're not talking about something that's like a terrorist act. Like, these are civil liberties that we're asking for, and I think that's just a matter of fairness. And I think that, like, when you ask the most common American, what is fairness? They wouldn't be able to tell you, but truthfully, fairness is just an equal opportunity for anyone to perform, like in any way they choose to. And I think the fact that, like, we're having conversations, so having to have these type of conversations just goes to show that we still don't respect the civil liberties of our own American citizens.
Right.
More conversation when we return. Be sure to tell us what you think by using the hashtag IWYK. So Jonathan, continue this conversation about fairness and the fact that we still have to talk about these things about equality, lack of opportunity, and lack of fairness.
I think that's the most appropriate way to say it, lack thereof. And the reason I say that is because my own first encounter with such thing as far as like disenfranchisement of fairness was going to college and going to Morehouse. And it literally was one night I'm sitting there and I'm having a conversation. I'm trying to understand, my problem is so small, so incidental compared to the guys who are back home in D.C. who literally couldn't afford to go to Morehouse or couldn't even afford to go to a UDC and it's right here in your own city. And the fact that, like, you can't have education, you can't promote your own religion, you can't promote how you sexually identify yourself, you can't promote how you raise your own children, that goes to show that we don't appreciate each and every way that the American citizen may live. And it chooses to say that, like, we still live the old story. I mean, just earlier we asked, what was the question? We went back to the Independence Day in 1776. But independence back then was you had to be a white man who was Christian, you went to public schools, and you believed in being straight. That was it. And the fact that we're still celebrating that this many years later just goes to show that we're still stuck on that story because that doesn't exist anymore. We've changed, we've evolved, and I think that's something we have to appreciate.
And I will say, like, I feel privileged sitting here, right? Like, I was born with certain privileges that my parents were not afforded. And, I am here being able to talk about how I feel, which is not something that that opportunity is not given to people every day. There are people who are living in the shadows because of XYZ that supposedly defines them. And, for me, like, yes, like, there are many barriers in my way, but there are also privileges that I recognize for myself. I'm college educated, I work, I have the ability to actually speak my mind whether or not somebody wants to hear it or not. And, I can sit here and have a conversation with you all, and this is going on TV, right? And it's so, I feel lucky, but I still recognize that everything around me still affects me in some sort of way every day.
Definitely. I think even we see it, for example, I love hip hop, so Jay-Z just released his album. And one of the songs off of his album, he talks about his mom coming out as a lesbian. And she had to use drugs because she was, she couldn't deal with basically being able to not be able to come out. That is just not being, being the mother of one of the top artists in the world, but not being able to be a human. Those are the things that we're dealing with in our country, the land of the free. So you can't say that it's based off of your status, based off the money, but it's based off these structures that, like you said, that build these lies that we have to, place ourselves into.
I have a small question for all of us, like, because it just made me think about that just where you were going from a tangent. I started thinking about, like, how I grew up, and, like, in my household, like, my mom always told me, like, what happens in this house stays in this house, and what happens outside, like, stays outside, blend the two. And you start thinking about, like, our own narration of just our communities, and I think that sort of kind of started to hinder us more than anything because we don't tell our full stories, and then the media chooses to pick apart the story because they choose it. Instead of us getting in front of it and, like, us pushing forward our own narrative, I think that we've become so honestly content with the narrative that's been created for us.
And to piggyback off of that, I think some of us have become content with these stories that's already out here in the world and in society. But I think that's where we as millennials need to, how do we push through these stories and how do we go about it? Like, I feel like in today's time, we get aggressive. We don't like to be looked at as certain things. We don't like to be judged. We're gonna cuss somebody out if they say the wrong thing to us or if they try us. But I think that's our problem. I feel like we can't give these people what they want. Like, if you know this person is going to talk to you like this, then rise above it. And you spit some words back to them. Don't use a cuss word. Don't make your vocabulary seem small. But go against the grain that society has already pushed you to fail in. Don't jump into the hole of that, but also, you know, rise above just that. That's what hurts me that us as millennials don't do. I hate that we don't try to change these stories and change these thoughts that society has about us. If you know you're not a H or a B or whatever, then stop walking down the street and saying it, because if this person said it to you, then you're gonna be upset. And then we're gonna be sitting here having a conversation, then how come your friends can say it to you, but when I say it to you, and it's nothing but a cycle that just, to me, this doesn't make any sense.
And just a tad bit, we are in a critical moment, right, as millennials, because now we are the largest group. And after a while, we'll be in our 40s and our 50s. And if this same problem is going on, we can't blame anyone else but ourselves. That's why it's important that we come together and, you know, watch shows like this. We expand our, you know, our horizon, because we are in a critical moment to change the trajectory of America.
I feel like we could still blame other things, but my thing is, like, I although I'm kind of in the position of, like, I don't have to educate you. Like, you should be taking the initiative to learn. You should take the initiative to educate yourself. But I also understand that no one's gonna do it if I don't do it.
And
no one's gonna do it if we don't do it.
Most people like to, you know, stay in their own comfort zones amongst their own people who look like them and talk like them and walk like them. And there's a TEDx talk that's called "The Danger of a Single Story." And so, as you mentioned, there's this dominant narrative that has carried us since the beginning of the foundation of the United States. And so I definitely think we should all utilize our power individually and collectively through various media sources, whether social media, television, radio, music, to tell these stories, right? To tell the story of Jay-Z's mother and that struggle, right? So we have these different perspectives.
But then also recognize that while we're telling these stories, one, this isn't 50 years ago, so we don't only have to name MLK and all those other people from back then to say that they're the ones who can do it, because
That's
we as
true.
millennials can
That's
right
true.
now.
That's right.
And secondly, we have to get away from the idea that, like, success is singular and we work in silos, right? So I'm successful when I'm on the show because I went to Morehouse. You know, you went to Howard. Like, we all come from our own places, but how often do we go back? How often do we share? How often do we bring somebody with us the next time? I think that's when you start seeing that the millennials will take on the next torch. But until we do that, then I think we'll be stuck.
And it comes back to deconditioning, right? So, for example, just a year or two ago, we were at this huge discussion about the Confederate flag. And there's a group of people that still want to hold on to this Confederate flag, even though this flag represents terrorism. This flag is equivalent to
certain people.
This flag represents terrorism. Right? So they don't see it right. Just like there's ISIS members that don't see the ISIS flag that represents terrorism. But this flag represents evil. But there are some individuals that are conditioned because my mom had this flag, my grandfather had this flag. So as millennials, we have to do some deep deconditioning because there's things that we grew up with, you know, as the kids from the back in Miami, where I'm like, hey man, we don't have to, like, you don't have to sell. But because this is all I've seen and all I know, this is what I'm going to do. So we have to work and decondition our minds so that we can start changing for the future.
We've had a great conversation on this topic, but we have to go. Before we do, panel, the answer to our trivia question is the Declaration of Independence. This document was signed and declared on July 4th, 1776. Thanks for watching. See you next time.